She met me at the train station, then whispered, "They're taking my marina." The train had barely cleared the platform when Claire Morgan stepped into my path and caught the strap of my duffel bag with one hand. Not my chest, not my arm. The strap. Even after 5 years, she still understood boundaries better than anyone I knew. The crossing bell kept clanging behind me, hollow and metallic, while the afternoon heat baked the smell of old creosote, drying seaweed, and hot rail dust out of the wooden planks. Gray Harbor looked the same at first glance: the green depot windows, the gulls circling over the bait shop roofs, the harbor masts rising beyond the station like thin white needles. But Claire did not look like a woman waiting for an old friend. She looked like a woman who had outrun bad news and found me 1 minute before it caught her. She wore a beige cardigan over a high-neck blouse, sleeves pushed up like she had come straight from work at the marina. Her dark hair had been pulled back in a loose clip, but wind had worked half of it free. In her other hand, she held a folded county notice with an orange header. I knew that color. County enforcement. "You weren't supposed to meet me," I said. The lawyer called. She replied, "He said you had 48 hours to sign the deed transfer on your father's house before your next shipping contract." "That is why I'm here." "No." She lifted the folded notice. "That is why I found you first." The train rolled farther down the line, taking the last metal thunder with it. The platform went too quiet. Claire looked past me toward the harbor. "The county posted a condemnation notice on the Maritime Center this morning," she said. "Hayes wants the parcel for condos. His brother-in-law is the inspector. If I cannot stabilize the eastern seawall before October 15th, the bank pulls my operating loan and Hayes buys my family's marina at auction." There it was. Not a vague favor. Not a sentimental reunion. A deadline. A developer. A family legacy with a clock tied around its throat. I looked toward the water, where the old masts rose beyond the depot roof. "You called contractors?" "3. One refused without the permit Hayes blocked. One doubled his price after Hayes called him. One said the autumn squall would hit before a crew could finish safely." "Why me?" Claire's fingers tightened once around the notice. "Because you understand load, tension, and storm rigging better than anyone in this town. Because emergency stabilization can pause the condemnation long enough for proper inspection. And because your father's deed transfer still ties you legally to Gray Harbor for 2 more days." I let the last sentence settle. Practical. Direct. Very clear. She was not asking me to come back because of old feelings. She was giving me a reason that could stand in daylight. I shifted the duffel strap on my shoulder. "I came here to sign a paper and leave." "I know." "Claire." Her eyes came back to mine. They were steady, but the notice in her hand trembled when the crossing bell gave one final soft clang behind the depot. "I need a captain," she said, "not a memory." The old harbor sat 5 minutes from the station, but the drive stretched longer inside the cab of her truck. Claire kept both hands on the wheel, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the road. The dashboard had a crack above the glove box. A coil of dock line sat on the floorboard. The truck smelled of wet canvas, old rope, and sawdust from some repair she had probably started alone before the county arrived. I watched the storefronts pass. The bakery had a new blue sign. The pharmacy windows were papered over. The bait shop where my father used to buy coffee before dawn had become a kayak rental place. My father's old repair shed was still visible beyond the inlet road, leaning the same way he used to lean against responsibility, slightly, stubbornly, and just enough to worry everyone around him. Gray Harbor had changed just enough to prove it had not waited for me. Claire slowed at the stop sign by the church. "The lawyer said you were selling the house." "I signed the listing agreement from Singapore." "You never came back to walk through it?" "No." The signal clicked in the cab. She turned toward the Marina Road. "Your father's workshop roof collapsed last winter," she said. "The town cleared the debris before it blocked the lane." My jaw tightened once. I did not ask who paid. I already knew. Claire Morgan had always had a habit of fixing things no one thanked her for. When she pulled into the Maritime Center lot, I saw the problem before I read the notice. The eastern dock had dropped. Not collapsed yet. Dropped. The seawall sagged near the outer piling, and the main walkway leaned toward the tide at an angle no working dock should hold. Yellow county tape crossed the office door. A strip of it snapped in the sea breeze, tapping the glass in a rhythm that sounded too much like a warning. Beyond the lot, a black SUV sat near the road with tinted windows and a polished hood. "Hayes?" I asked. His assistant, watching? Subtle. He stopped being subtle after the zoning board approved his condo concept. I got out of the truck and walked to the county notice. Notice of condemnation. Hazard code 402. Structural integrity of eastern seawall and primary dock compromised. Facility must vacate by October 15th, pending demolition review. I read it twice. Then I stepped onto the ramp. The dock groaned under my boots, low and sick, like a ship taking on water below decks. The sound came through the soles of my shoes and traveled up my legs before the board stopped moving. I crouched at the edge, leaned over the piling, and studied the damage. The primary timber had sheared just below the high water mark. Rusted bolts had failed under lateral stress. A heavy impact had shifted the cross-bracing, twisting the load toward the weakest section. Someone had tied a red ribbon around the broken piling, as if the wood needed help announcing it was wounded. This was not ordinary stormware. What hit it? A transient yacht broke loose during the last squall, Claire said from the ramp. It struck the outer piling. I filed the incident report. Hayes got the repair permit frozen before I could start permanent work. You have replacement timbers? Yes. Steel cable? Yes. Winches? In the storage shed. Load sensors? She hesitated, then nodded toward the office. Dad bought digital strain gauges for a preservation grant. They're still boxed. Of course they were. Claire's father had built half this place out of useful tools and faith. I stood. The tide was ebbing, wind northeast, 10 knots. Enough daylight left for assessment, not enough for hesitation. Emergency stabilization only buys time, I said. It does not clear the condemnation. You still need county inspection and bank confirmation. I know. If Hayes challenges it, the inspector has to review load data. He may still push back. I know. And if I sign anything false, I risk my maritime license in your marina. Claire folded the notice and put it in her canvas work bag. Then don't sign anything false. I looked at her. For 5 years, I had told myself Claire Morgan needed someone steadier than me, someone with clean schedules, dry shoes, and a permanent address. Then she stood beside a failing dock with a developer's car watching from the road and asked me for the one thing I could actually give. Work. Lay the timbers on the upper asphalt. I said, I need half-inch braided steel, 2 hydraulic winches, turnbuckles, every intact shackle in that shed, and the old Grant sensors. Her shoulders lowered by half an inch. Not relief. Readiness. Copy that, she said. We worked until the sun dropped behind the cannery roof. By the time the first gulls settled onto the breakwater, the marina lot had become a map of timber, cable, and hard choices. I stripped my travel shirt down to the undershirt I wore beneath it, not because the work was dramatic, but because rigging steel cable in September heat turns a man's collar into a rope around his neck. Claire hauled hardware without waiting to be told twice. She did not ask me if each thing was heavy. She picked it up, measured what she could carry, and moved. That mattered. Panic wastes steps. Claire wasted none. At dusk, I drove to my father's house to get the old tool chest I had not wanted to touch. The place looked smaller than my memory had kept it. White paint peeling off the porch rails, one upstairs window boarded, grass tall along the fence, the front door stuck before it opened, swollen from damp. Inside, the air smelled of dust, cedar, and old arguments. The tool chest sat where he had left it beside the basement stairs. I opened it with a key I had carried across 3 oceans and never used. The brass barometer from his workshop hung crooked on the wall, its needle pressing toward storm. I took the chest, the barometer, 2 coil straps, and my grandfather's compass from the drawer where I had hidden it the day I left. Then I realized the drawer was empty. The compass was gone. For a second, I stood in the quiet house with my hand on the drawer pull. I knew where it was. Claire's desk. 5 years ago. I had left it there without a note because a note would have required courage. I had told myself she would throw it away. Claire did not throw useful things away. Back at the marina, she had work lights strung along the dock and the strain gauges laid out on a towel. She handed me a mug of black coffee from a heavy ceramic cup. Handle turned toward my right hand. "I didn't know if you still take it black," she said. "I do. You always said sugar made coffee dishonest." "That sounds like something I would say when I was 25 and unbearable." "You were 25 and very certain. I'm 30 now and only selectively certain." That earned a small sound from her, almost a laugh, but too tired to fully form. It was enough. By morning, the marina had become a closed system of lines, pulleys, water, and pressure. I rigged a temporary cradle under the damaged eastern section, anchoring steel cables back to the stable western pilings. The goal was not beauty, it was load transfer. Keep the failing section from twisting, stop the shear from spreading, and give the inspector something measurable enough to sign or dispute in writing. Claire did not hover. She worked. She found hardware faster than I asked for it. She marked cracked boards with chalk, or she closed off the unsafe walkway with rope and printed signs that told guests exactly what they could and could not use. She called every slip renter personally. No excuses, no tremble in her voice, just facts, timelines, and a firm refund policy for the unusable berths. At 7 each morning, the heavy ceramic mug appeared on the workbench. I never saw her place it there. I always knew it was hers. On the third evening, I was under the dock, shoulder wedged against a wet beam, trying to seat a stubborn carriage bolt. The thread refused to catch. My headlamp turned every rust stain into a red-brown scar. Above me, Claire's footsteps stopped. "You're forcing it," she said. "It's cross-threaded." "Then back it out." "I need a tap large enough for a 2-inch housing." A pause. Then she crouched beside the access hatch and held out a heavy steel tapping bit wrapped in an oilcloth. "My father kept this in the bottom drawer of the office safe," she said. "He bought it after the shipyard strike and never found a reason to use it." I took the bit. The metal was warm from her hand. "You knew where this was?" "I know every drawer in this place." That was the first moment I understood she was not only defending a building. She was defending a map of her life. I backed out the bolt, retapped the housing, and seated the thread properly. The wrench turned clean after that, smooth and steady. The kind of small mechanical correction that can save a man from ruining a larger structure out of impatience. Claire remained crouched near the hatch. "You could have just forced it," she said. "I could have." "You didn't. You gave me the right tool." She nodded once, as if she had filed that answer somewhere important, then stood and crossed the dock to answer the office phone. I watched her step over a chalked-off hazard line without looking down. She knew every inch. The next afternoon, Hayes arrived. He stepped out of the black SUV wearing a tailored navy coat and the calm expression of a man who had already imagined someone else's property under his name. The county inspector followed with a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked younger than I expected and far less comfortable near the water. Claire walked out of the office first. I stayed near the dock, tablet in hand, letting her hold the first line. "Miss Morgan," Hayes said. "This facility is under condemnation. Continuing operations creates liability." "Emergency stabilization is underway," Claire replied. The inspector glanced at the cables. "Temporary rigging does not equal code compliance." "No," I said, walking over, "but it may pause demolition enforcement long enough for proper load review." Hayes looked me over. "And you are?" "Nathan Reed, Master Mariner, license number 44902. I'm documenting emergency stabilization." "A captain is not a structural engineer." "No," I said, "and I'm not claiming to be. I'm saying Section 12 allows federally licensed maritime stabilization in historic harbor facilities when immediate loss is likely. That does not make me the county authority. It requires the inspector to review the load data before signing a red tag." I handed the tablet to the inspector. Live strain gauge readings. Anchor points. Cable tension. Load transfer diagrams. Photographs of the damaged piling. The incident report from the yacht impact. The inspector's thumb hovered over the screen. Hayes watched him carefully. Too carefully. The inspector cleared his throat. I'll need to review this with the county office. Good, Claire said. Do that. Hayes turned to her with a thin smile. You're delaying the inevitable? Storm season will finish what paperwork began. Claire did not answer. She let him leave with his own words hanging behind him. After the SUV pulled away, the inspector remained for one extra moment. He looked at the dock, then at Claire. My brother-in-law does not tell me how to sign county documents, he said quietly. Claire's face did not change. Then put that in your process. He nodded once and left. When the lot emptied, I expected Claire to sag. She did not. She walked to the office door, removed one strip of county tape from the handle, and folded it into a neat square. What are you doing? I asked. Saving it. Why? Evidence? Practical? Controlled. No wasted steps. That evening, I went back to my father's house and slept on the floor, because the bed smelled like a man I was not ready to remember. Rain tapped the boarded window sometime after midnight. The brass barometer sat on a crate beside my sleeping bag, the needle still falling. At dawn, I carried it to the marina. Claire saw it as soon as I walked in. Your father's? Workshop wall? She took one glance at the needle. That bad? Stalling offshore. How long? 12 hours before it decides. She lifted the office phone and started calling slip renters before I finished the sentence. The storm did not arrive like a wall. It arrived like a negotiation that kept getting worse. First the air thickened. Then the gulls vanished. Then the rigging on the moored boats began to sing, high and thin through the masts. By late afternoon, the brass barometer had dropped hard, and the marina smelled of ozone, wet rope, and engine oil. Claire moved through the office with a pencil tucked behind one ear, logging calls and securing documents in plastic bins. I checked anchor points, added secondary lines, and installed 2 more sensors near the damaged eastern joint. At 8, I was in the storage shed checking shackles when the door blew open and hit the wall. Claire stood outside in a yellow rain jacket, one hand holding the frame. The office flashing is tearing loose. I reached for my canvas coat. I'll secure it. I know the roof line. I know storm rigging. She looked at the ladder outside, then at the black sky. Then I'll belay from the lower cleat. I wanted to refuse, not because she was wrong, because she was right, and that made the risk shared. We climbed in rain that came sideways. I crossed the slick metal roof with a rope around my waist, while Claire kept the line tensioned from the protected side of the wall. No shouting, no panic. When a gust slammed the flashing upward, she locked the rope before I slipped more than 6 inches. That one catch saved my shoulder from the gutter edge. When I climbed down, soaked and shaking from cold, she opened the shed door and stepped back first, giving the room enough air for both of us to think. Inside, the bulb swung from the ceiling, rain hammered the roof, the shed smelled of wet canvas, ozone, and old rope. Claire handed me a towel. Your hands are numb, she said. I can still move them. That was not my question. I took the towel and dried my face. She stayed by the workbench, an arm's length away. Why did you really leave? She asked. The rain struck the tin roof in hard silver bursts. I could have used the shipping contract as an answer. I could have said ports change, crews rotate, life moves. All of it would have been true enough to hide behind. Instead, I looked at the coil of rope between us. My father lost everything he touched. I said, my brother ran the first time life got difficult. I told myself leaving was cleaner than becoming another man who broke something good. Claire's thumb moved once over the edge of the towel she had kept in her hand. Then she set it down. No speech. No rescue. Just the next practical thing. Then help me finish the thing you came back to fix, she said. After that, decide who you are with evidence. The bulb swung once. The rope between us stopped moving. By morning, the storm had stalled offshore. That was worse. A passing storm hits and leaves. A stalled storm gathers weight. At 10, the inspector sent a message. The county would not lift the condemnation unless the stabilization became permanent enough to satisfy bank risk review. Temporary rigging was no longer enough. At 11, Hayes returned with a manila folder. I was standing on the dock, watching the water chew at the lower planks when he stepped onto the ramp. "The bank has called the loan," he said. "They consider the storm warning an unmitigated risk on a condemned property. Claire has until 5 to show permanent structural compliance, or foreclosure begins." "You called the bank?" I informed them of liability. Of course he had. I walked to the office. Claire was behind the desk with the phone still in her hand. Her face was pale, but the desk in front of her was organized. Loan documents, incident reports, permit records, inspection copies, and a small empty square in the dust beside the keyboard where something used to sit. "My grandfather's compass," I said. She opened the top drawer. Inside lay the brass compass I had left behind 5 years ago. "I kept it there," she said, "for decisions. I did not touch it. Not yet." "The bank wants permanent proof," she said. "We need stronger timber. The supplier is closed because of the storm. Your father's dry dock." She blinked. "The North Inlet? It's made of old-growth heart pine. You own it. We document emergency salvage from your own property. Use only what is necessary, and give the inspector a permanent brace he can measure. The inlet is 2 miles by water. The gale is already building. I've crossed worse water for less important reasons." She stood. "I'll call the bank manager, not the loan officer. Tell him the inspector will be here at 3:30. And if Hayes blocks him? Then he does it in front of the bank." I grabbed the dry dock keys from her wallboard and paused at the doorway. "Claire?" She looked up from the phone. "If the old beams are rotten, I come back empty. Then we use that fact and choose the next step." That was Claire. No fantasy, no collapse. Next step? The next 4 hours belonged to wind, rope, and heart pine. I took the workboat across the inlet with rain cutting the water into gray ribbons. The old dry dock leaned like a fossil against the shore, half rotted at the edges, but still holding its central beams. Before I cut anything, I photographed the site, marked the removed pieces, recorded the timestamp, and logged the emergency use under Claire's property file. The first beam fought the saw. The second freed clean. The third had rot along one edge, so I rejected it and marked the reason in the log. The fourth and fifth were solid old-growth heart pine, dense enough to dull a chain and heavy enough to remind me why ships once trusted timber before steel. The towback fought me every yard. The timber dragged heavy in the chop. The diesel engine strained. The tow line sang under tension, and every knot had to hold. Spray hit my face until salt gathered at the corners of my mouth. Twice. The workboat's bow fell hard enough into a trough that the deck shook under my boots. The storm wanted carelessness. I gave it math. When I reached the marina, Claire stood on the upper platform in the yellow rain jacket, braced beside the cleat. She caught the heaving line on the first throw. No cheer. No wasted breath. Just work. Together, we hauled the beams, winched them into position, and bolted them across the damaged section. Claire handed me steel plates before I asked. She checked the diagram against the actual placement. She caught one washer before it rolled into the water and slapped it into my palm without looking up. At 3:37, the last bolt seated. The dock changed beneath my boots. Not perfect. Not pretty. Solid. The inspector arrived with Hayes behind him. He measured the heart pine beams, checked the bolt spacing, reviewed the load telemetry, called the county office from the ramp, waited for confirmation while the wind shoved rain under everyone's collars. Finally, he lowered the phone. "The emergency condemnation is lifted pending formal follow-up review," he said. "The structure meets the stabilization requirement." Hayes's face went still. Claire pulled out her phone and called the bank manager on speaker. "The county inspector has lifted the hazard status," she said. "Permanent stabilization is documented." The manager's voice came through thin but clear. "With the hazard lifted, the loan returns to standard terms. The call is canceled." Claire ended the call. She looked at Hayes. "The marina is not for sale." Hayes left without another word. The inspector gave Claire a written temporary clearance before he followed. He also took a copy of Hayes's correspondence with the bank, because Claire had printed every email and clipped them in order before the meeting began. Only when the black SUV disappeared did the dock seem to exhale. I stood by the new brace with rain dripping from my sleeves, my hands aching, my shoulders hollowed by exhaustion. "My work here is done," I said. The sentence sounded familiar. Too familiar. I turned toward the office. "I'll pack my tools before the surge peaks." "Nathan?" Claire's voice stopped me. She stood near the workbench, holding the brass compass. She walked across the dock slowly, careful on the wet boards. When she reached me, she placed the compass in my palm, then closed her fingers once over mine before letting go. Behind her, the dock groaned against the surge. The new heart-pine brace held. "I kept this because I knew you would come back for it someday," she said. I looked down at the compass. The brass was cold from the office drawer. I was not sure I deserved to. "I never stopped waiting." The words did not shatter anything. They steadied it. The compass sat in my hand. The wind moved between us. Claire stepped back first, giving me room to choose without making the choice smaller. I slipped the compass into my coat pocket. "Then we should get inside," I said. "We have a storm schedule to map." Her smile was tired, sharp at the edges, and real. "Captain? Director?" We walked up the ramp side by side while the storm hit the harbor and failed to take what she had built. The autumn squall lasted 17 hours. We rode it out inside the office with the brass barometer on the desk, the radio set to the harbor channel, and the strain gauge readings updating every 10 seconds. Claire wrote each reading into a paper log in case the power failed. I checked the dock through the window between gusts. At 2 a.m, one secondary line snapped on an empty slip, and we replaced it in the rain before it could become a larger problem. At dawn, the marina still stood. The eastern brace held. The county returned 3 days later for formal follow-up. This time, a senior inspector came with the original one. They reviewed the telemetry, the dry dock salvage record, the heart pine measurements, the incident report, and the bank timeline. Hayes did not attend, though his attorney sent a letter that arrived 15 minutes before the inspection began. Claire read it, placed it under the incident report, and kept going. The formal condemnation was lifted at 2:18 p.m. The bank sent written confirmation before 5. The zoning board opened a conflict of interest inquiry into Hayes's involvement with the inspector's family connection and his contact with the lender. The original inspector was removed from all review involving Morgan Maritime Heritage Center until the inquiry ended. Claire did not celebrate that day. She walked to the eastern dock, placed one hand on the new heart pine brace, and stood there until the tide turned. I stood back by the office door. She had earned the moment alone. 2 weeks later, I signed the deed transfer on my father's house. Not to sell it. To move it into repair. The lawyer looked surprised when I changed the instructions. I did not explain. I had spent 5 years believing every inheritance from my father had to be escaped. Gray Harbor had just shown me one that could be rebuilt. The shipping company called twice about a new transocean route. I declined both. Then they offered me something different, regional director for the coastal fleet, based out of Gray Harbor, overseeing logistics, safety training, and storm readiness across 6 ports. No more months lost between horizons, no more using distance as proof of control. I accepted from the marina office while Claire pretended not to listen from the file cabinet. When I hung up, she placed a fresh mug of coffee beside the phone. "Handle turned right," I said. "Habit? Dangerous things, habits. Only the bad ones." Her mouth curved slightly before she went back to labeling inspection folders. 8 months later, the train crossing bell rang across the water while I sat at the splicing bench outside the restored Maritime Center. Spring had softened the harbor. The heart pine brace had weathered the winter storms and gone pale silver in the sun. The main dock no longer leaned. The eastern slips were open. Children in bright life jackets learned knot work near the office while an old boat builder named Mr. Alvarez complained that no one respected a proper bowline anymore. The county conflict inquiry had not made Hayes disappear, but it had exposed enough to slow his condo plan and force his company to withdraw the marina parcel from its acquisition map. The bank loan remained on standard terms. The condemnation file was closed. Claire had converted the emergency repair documentation into a preservation grant application and won enough funding to begin the next phase of restoration. I still lived in the apartment above my father's workshop while I repaired the house room by room. The roof no longer leaked. The porch rails stood straight. The workshop door opened without sticking. Some evenings, Claire came by with takeout and a clipboard and treated my repair list like a maritime operation. She never once called it saving me. She called it maintenance. That morning, she came out of the Maritime Center carrying 2 mugs and a cream envelope. She set my coffee on the bench, handle turned toward my right hand. Then she placed the envelope beside it. "The Boat Building School Incorporation papers," she said. I wiped my hands on a canvas rag and opened the folder. The signature line read, "Co-directors, Claire Morgan and Nathan Reed." I looked up. She stood beside the workbench with the same steady expression she had worn at the bank call, the storm, and the inspection ramp. "This is not a thank you," she said. "The board approved the role, the budget is funded, the school needs your skill, and I want your name on what we build next." The crossing bell echoed again, softer this time. I picked up the pen. The line in my other hand held steady. I signed beside her name. Claire's shoulders lowered as the ink dried in the sun. Then she took the compass from the corner of the bench and set it between the 2 coffee mugs. "Now it knows where home is," she said. I looked at the dock, the school papers, the marina office, and the woman who had never asked me to become smaller so she could keep me. The wind moved through the rigging. Nothing snapped. Nothing pulled away. For once, staying felt like the most honest navigation I knew. The end.